views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Open BxRx, BronxNet's special coverage providing you the latest information that matters to you during COVID-19, the coronavirus, and now through social justice actions and civil unrest happening nationwide and here in the Bronx. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and today is Election Day, Tuesday, June 23rd. Coming up, we'll learn more about the For the Bronx, a group of educators providing election information for the congressional race here in District 15. Then, the producer of Out Loud TV here at BronxNet joins us to discuss LGBTQ rights during Pride Month and the community's solidarity with the Black Lives Matter protest. After that, two protesters share their testimonies on the police brutality that they encountered at a recent protest in the South Bronx. And we'll learn about transportation alternatives and how they're providing free bicycles for essential workers through COVID-19. So please stay tuned. Open BxRx starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx on BronxNet. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, inviting you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. Today is Tuesday, June 23rd. Primary Election Day, and the Bronx has some very important decisions to make, including the selection of a new congressperson in District 15 to replace current incumbent Jose Serrano, who is retiring after 30 years of serving the district. For the Bronx is a platform founded by a group of educators seeking to bring awareness to this district's election. Joining us now to discuss the election, voter education, and what you need to know for today's Bronx primaries 2020 and more are Laura Reyes and Julius Figueroa. Welcome. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So first, just to start off the bat, tell us a little bit more about For the Bronx and how and why it came to fruition during this time.
So I'm from the Bronx, born and raised, and I live in this congressional district. I have my entire life, actually. And I was reading an article in the Gothamist that was talking about the race and how important it is. Often people reference that the 15th district is the poorest congressional district in the United States. And then it talked about all the candidates that are running. And it also said that Ruben Diaz Sr. was in the lead. And that really disturbed me because having known him my entire life, really, I know that he's very conservative. I know that his values do not reflect my values. And it makes me very scared to know that someone that does not reflect my values or the values of my students is likely to win this race solely because of his last name. A lot of people make the mistake of believing that Ruben Diaz Sr. is Ruben Diaz Jr. They are not the same. Ruben Diaz Jr. is actually very liberal, right? And he does a lot and he's out there with the people. Ruben Diaz Sr. is not like that at all. And so I posted an article that I read in the Gothamist, and Julius reached out to me and he was like, yeah, man, like this race is crazy right now. No one knows about these amazing candidates. And so we started brainstorming and we were like, why don't we just like create a page where we can just talk about this with people, because people don't know that one, there's a primary that's happening that is huge. This is the bluest congressional district in the United States. It's the poorest congressional district in the United States. And we're unseating, well, Jose Serrano is leaving after 30 years. This is a big deal, right? And so we just thought like, let's create a like let's create an Instagram page, right? Like, let's just talk about like, what is a congressional district? What is, what do they do? Why does it matter, right? And also, like, how can I vote? Am I registered to vote? Where do I vote? What's this thing about voting by mail, right? A lot of people are not informed, in particular, young people. And young people are like, if young people got together and voted, it would make a huge difference in this race.
And I noticed that that's one of the aspects of the page for the Bronx. You guys focus on the youth because you are educators. You're bringing the youth to the forefront of these issues. Julius, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Just involving the youth and the importance of getting the youth on board with this particular election.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm also a teacher in the Bronx, and a big part of this is just really teaching not only our kids but the community members. As Laura was saying, like, what's a primary, right? So we have to start from the beginning, right? The U.S. House of Representatives, each state has a certain number of representatives to represent their state and to represent their district, right? And so since this is a primary, our votes count directly. And since this is for the House of Reps, our votes count directly. And as Laura stated so brilliantly, this is one of the most blue districts in the country, which means whoever wins this primary is probably going to win in November. And so it's huge, right? If someone's retiring, if Jose Serrano is retiring after 30 years, the person that we pick to replace him is going to have lasting change. And so we really need to be careful about that. And I think another part of this education process is really acknowledging that this is not a normal time, right? We're in the middle of COVID-19. This community is amongst the hardest hit by COVID-19. And so not only do we need someone in Congress to fight for the district, to fight on behalf of the district, we also have to acknowledge that because of this, the way the election is happening is not business as normal, right? People are going to have to vote by mail. People can't go knock door to door as they would before. And so what we're really trying to do is create that platform to let everyone know who's running in this district, to let people know where do people stand politically, what do they value. So that's why we're having some of the candidates speak about what they care about. We're having some of our students speak about who they're endorsing. And it's been really great to get those student voices involved and really to also interact with the candidates who are really looking for any way to get their own message out.
Right. And speaking of that, you know how COVID and all the civil unrest that is going on right now has kind of changed everything around us. What are some of the challenges when it comes to raising awareness for these type of elections that you found to be true, especially given that in the South Bronx, voter turnout has been historically low?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we decided to create this is because a lot of our students cannot go out and protest. I myself have not been to protest, even though it's something that I would absolutely do. But my mom got really sick during this time, and I don't feel safe because we really don't know what's happening right now. I don't know if I'm going to be bringing back anything to my mom that could get her more sick, right? And a lot of our students can't go out to protest. They feel kind of like useless, right? Like they're watching this. They are experiencing it in their neighborhoods because, like, I'm an assistant principal on University and Burnside. Our street was looted. A lot of the stores that my kids go to, they can't go to anymore. This is a very real thing that's happening for them in their neighborhood. And they kind of feel like, well, what can I even do? Julius and I talked about this earlier today. The worst experience of teaching that I had was the day after Donald Trump was elected. It was devastating for kids. I worked in an immigrant community, and kids were scared. You know, they were like, "What's going to happen? Like, is my family not going to be able to stay?" And it made me think about, what do you do in those moments for kids so that they feel safe, so that they feel like what they have to say matters. What we're trying to do is give them a platform to express themselves, because kids, I don't know about you, but I grew up in a household where my mom spoke English, but not well, right? And so I was constantly going to doctor's appointments with my grandmother, my grandfather, my mom, and I was a translator.
Yep.
For a lot of our kids, that is what they do. They inform their parents. They let their parents know, like, hey, this is happening. With social media, they're seeing things more rapidly. My 16-year-old sits with us every day and he goes like, hey, do you know what's happening? And he'll tell me something that he saw on TikTok, right? So informing kids through social media and saying, hey, you know what? Your voice actually really matters. So like get educated on who the candidates are, and then turn and go talk to your mom, go talk to your tia and tell them, when you vote, I think you should vote for so-and-so because so-and-so believes X, Y, and Z. And then esa tia is gonna call todos los primos and everybody that they know and say, mira, a mí me dijeron, or they told me that so-and-so is a good candidate. Because right now, the people that are gonna vote for Diaz are the older Christian vote. And, you know, we have to think about who are the people we want to represent us, because religion is not the only piece. Alexandra Ocasio has managed to bring a light from her district to the Bronx. Yeah. I think people are focused more on AOC herself than they are about the district. Mm. And so what we need is someone that will bring a light here to this community and say, like, this community is resilient. This community has tons of potential. And you know what? Instead of discounting us for all these years and saying all these awful things that are not true, let me bring a light to this community and show you how wonderful it is. Yeah. That's what we're really hoping to do. And I'm hoping that kids will look at this, will educate themselves on candidates and say, I think this person will represent me the way that I want to be represented.
Right. I completely agree. And I'm part of the community as well. So I feel every word you said. And next, I want to discuss the congressional race in particular. For the Bronx, you have created this nice graphic showing which zip codes belong to the district. If your zip code, and if you're a viewer right now and you see your zip code on this graphic, then this race applies to you. This is a big district. So I just wanted to find like who the candidates are and how For the Bronx is helping people get acquainted with each person. You can feel free to either stay impartial or express your own thoughts and feelings regarding the ranging spectrum of candidates, of course.
Yeah, so I mean, to start off, the focus of For the Bronx is really to educate. So we're not really endorsing anyone on the platform, but we are really, as Laura has mentioned before, we're really encouraging people to vote for who represents their values, who represents the values of this district and of the South Bronx. And we feel strongly that Ruben Diaz Sr. does not represent those values, right? Someone who has made public, open, homophobic comments, anti-Semitic comments, right? That's not something that we agree with. We don't feel like that's the values of this community. And so we want to make that clear. That being said, there's over 10 candidates in this race, right? And it's not just a matter of anyone but Diaz, right? There's a lot of great candidates. For example, Richie Torres is a current New York City council member who has really done a great job of creating distance between him and Ruben Diaz, right? He's a young Black man. He's openly gay. He has been in New York City politics, right? And he really has a good chance in the race. But there's also many other candidates, right? Candidates like Samelis Lopez are running on very progressive platforms, right? Samelis Lopez is endorsed by Ocasio-Cortez. She's endorsed by Bernie. And so like people like her, they're running on a platform that refuses super PAC money, that supports Medicare for all, that supports or calls for universal public housing. And so what we're really trying to do is we're trying to let the people know these are who the candidates are. They are not all the same. They have their own priorities. They have their own values. They have their own lived experiences. And so although when we get to the voting booth, we want to make sure we don't just vote for the person who's been around the longest, the person whose name we recognize first. We do want to make sure that the person we're voting for is someone that we believe in, that we can get behind. and that who we really think when they get to Washington, when they get to Congress, they're going to fight for our values. They're going to fight on behalf of this district, right? But they're also going to make change in Congress, because again, this is the United States House of Representatives. This is not just local politics. And just as Jose Serrano was around for 30 years, this next person could be around for a while. And so we want someone that represents the values of the district.
Before we go, I also wanted to bring up the Do It for the Bronx challenge that you also started on For the Bronx. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so we got a group of awesome educators, and we just kind of brainstormed, and we thought, you know, how do we use this platform to get more student voice? And so essentially what it is kids will go on to, there's resources on a link in our site on Instagram, where you can be a teacher. It could be anyone, really. You click on it. There is kind of like a cheat sheet on the candidates. And what we did was we looked at their campaign sites. And believe it or not, Ruben Diaz does not have a campaign site. And we searched. So we went onto their campaign sites and kind of used a bio so that kids could see what are the like quick snippets, right? I believe in X, Y, and Z. This is what I believe about in education. This is my platform. So they would read through that, and then we gave them some like sentence starters, you know. My name is so-and-so, and I'm like, my name is Laura, I'm from the Bronx. And I would like to endorse X candidate because blank, blank, blank. And so then they would post it at hashtag Do It for the Bronx. And then we would send it out. What's been cool is to have candidates send us videos specifically for our platform. So we got a video from Tomas Ramos, who personally I think like has not been counted in this race. I think that he has some strong potential. Frangel just sent us one, I think last night, and so we're gonna post that. Idanis also posted one, and so we're waiting from some other candidates. But essentially, like, this challenge is to give kids the opportunity to say, some of them can vote, right? And they're gonna say, I'm gonna vote for so-and-so. Some of them can't vote yet, but their opinion matters. So this is the platform for them.
I think it's amazing, and using social media to gain that momentum for this election and even for the future is incredible. So thank you both, and thank you to the group of educators who have put this together. Before we go, how can people get connected with you and For the Bronx? Please send the message for the community for Election Day, which is today, June 23rd.
Yeah, I mean, follow For the Bronx if you want more information. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, but today's the day, right? So if you haven't already voted, get out there and vote, right? Put on a mask, do it safely. But if you haven't voted, make sure your vote counts, right? Because unlike the presidential elections where we have the whole electoral college, your vote counts in this one. So when you get there, vote for the person that represents your values and the values of this district.
Yes.
And if you are not sure about who to vote for, go onto our site, check out our link with a quick blurb. It's 3 pages. So you can quickly read it, like as you're on your way to the polling booth. I think what's important for people to know is that you can also vote in person. You do not just have to vote using an absentee vote.
Thank you both for your time today and for creating For the Bronx for everyone in the South Bronx.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Of course, folks, as you heard, you can follow For the Bronx on Instagram for more information and resources. Poll sites are open today from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Open BxRx, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Open BxRx. June is Pride Month, a celebration of the self-affirmation, dignity, equality, and increased visibility of our lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. And it hasn't been easy to get there, as Pride has had a history of protest as well. Through COVID-19, Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and recent historic legislation, the community has stood in solidarity. Out Loud is an incredible show here at BronxNet, giving the LGBTQ plus community of the Bronx a voice. Joining us now to discuss is Anthony Parker, producer of Out Loud TV. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. To start off, I just want to learn about Out Loud and your work here in the Bronx with the show.
Yeah, sure. I started Out Loud really as a way to bridge the gaps and make people aware of the different resources that are available here for the community. I felt that a voice was lacking for the community, and I wanted to change that. You know, we hear of all the different safe spaces and resources that are in Manhattan, but I was like, what about the Bronx? You know, so I wanted to bring light to that. And so, it's been so fun to do the show, and it's been such a learning process for me too, and learning about the LGBT history of the Bronx.
Mhm.
And we also have on different LGBTQ plus performers. So it's a fun time.
I think it's amazing and I commend you, and I'm so proud to be your neighbor here at BronxNet. So I wanted to get straight into discussing Pride Month.
Yeah.
It's June, Pride Month, and it's a little different this year for obvious reasons, right? Can we discuss the history of riots like Stonewall and how that led to the passing of the LGBTQ rights that are here today?
Sure. Yeah. So of course, Pride Month, we celebrate LGBTQ plus rights, but there were, many injustices that the community faced. That, even before the Stonewall riots, there were several protests, riots, and raids that were happening all throughout the country that not many people know of. But of course, the Stonewall riots was a catalyst for lots of change, and brought us to, the fight continued, and it brought us to where we are today. But there are still issues that are going on, and Out Loud, we have reprioritized our conversations during Pride to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and different ways that people can get involved, because there would be no Pride without people of color. And it's important that we recognize that during Pride Month, but especially in our daily lives, not just during Pride Month.
Right. And I love that you're using your platform to provide resources for the community as well during these tough times. So, thank you for restructuring your show to provide that.
Of course, of course. It's important, like the saying that's been going around, if you're silent, you are complicit. And it is true. So, like I said, the community would not have its rights today if it were not for people of color. So it's important to discuss that. And we're also seeing, Black trans lives disproportionately taken. So.
I also wanted to definitely discuss that. There's a hashtag going around Black Trans Lives Matter as well. And there's a surge in violence and hate crimes against transgender women of color in particular. Can you please tell us about the calls to end the violence and issues with erasure and abuse of police against the LGBTQ community?
Sure. So in 2019, we saw at least 26 transgender lives violently taken, majority being Black transgender women. And in 2020, so when I filmed my latest episode 2 weeks ago, I said that there were at least 12 transgender lives taken so far in 2020. Now here we are 2 weeks later, and I believe the number is 15 now. The latest being Dominique Fells and Ryan Melton. Um, so this is happening. This is a reality, and it needs to be discussed. Transgender people, at least 30% of transgender people face poverty and homelessness, and transgender people are 3 times more likely, or they face unemployment 3 times more than the general population. So these are things that need to be talked about. And these Black transgender lives that were taken, we weren't really seeing that covered in the media up until recently, so that conversation is not being had. So it's time to bring Black trans people, the most marginalized group, into the mainstream discussion and shed light on it, because what are we waiting for, essentially? You know what I mean? How many more lives taken, or is it gonna when is change going to happen? So these hate crimes and these lives that are being taken need to be treated as hate crimes, and they need to be dealt with adequately by the criminal justice system.
Right. And speaking of change, Anthony, the push for legislative change and the recent passing of the LGBTQ workplace protections, what does this mean for the community, and why do you think it took so long to pass this?
This simply means that people no longer have to hide at the workplace. by losing your job because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity, first of all, those are things that have nothing to do with work performance.
Right.
But losing your job, means loss of livelihood, loss of medical insurance. There are so many ramifications that come about. As to why it took so long, that's a great question. It is long overdue, and it is great that people can be comforted knowing now that they can be out and comfortable at their places of employment.
Right. And I also wanted to ask the ways in which the LGBTQ community is navigating mobilizing during these times of civil unrest and protest. We see a lot of solidarity when it comes to both ends, because it's the same thing. We're all a family and we're all here for each other. So just tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, like I said, Stonewall riots were led by people of color. We are seeing Black trans lives violently taken in insane numbers. So as a community, it is time, beyond time, to really get involved and speak up. And it's so important for everyone to get involved in this. Black lives are part of the LGBTQ plus community. And there's no room for silence. There's no room to just sit and watch this happen. This has gone on for far, far, far too long. And as a community, it's important. Pride is not Pride Month, unless it's intersectional, unless it includes everyone. So that's why it's important for the LGBT community to be involved in this.
Absolutely. And before we go, Anthony, can you just share some ways people can be allies and show support and solidarity for the Black LGBTQ community during these tough times?
Yes, of course. And we shared this on the show, and it is on Out Loud's Instagram. But there are so many ways that you can get involved. Now, I realize that we are in a pandemic right now. But if you are able to get out there and protest, if you're not able to, again, I realize we're in a pandemic, but donate to organizations if you can. And if you can't do either of those, there are so many other ways. Sign petitions, educate yourself. Be daring to feel uncomfortable and have conversations with people that may not be comfortable, but that will educate yourself or maybe educate the other person. And just, it's important to become involved. Think about what you've been conditioned to think about race growing up and culture. What are you doing to support people of color? There are so many resources online that you can follow and educate yourself. And the most important thing is voting. Mm-hmm. Everyone must vote. It is the way to have your voice heard. And change starts on the local level of government. So it's important for everyone to get out there and vote. Now, the absentee ballot deadline has passed, but there is still early voting. So please get out there and vote, because it's the only way to truly make change.
I think folks also follow Anthony. Before we go, Anthony, can you tell me how people can get connected with you and watch Out Loud on BronxNet and stay in touch?
Yes, sure. So Out Loud airs Mondays at 7:30 on BronxNet on the BX Omni channel. And we're on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And our website where you can stay up to date with everything Out Loud is outloudtalk.com.
Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for sharing this wealth of knowledge with us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Again, folks, we're so happy to be your neighbors here at BronxNet, Anthony, and thank you for your work and everything you do with Out Loud TV. You can stay connected with Anthony at outloud.tv on Instagram and visit their website at outloudtalk.com. Open BxRx, we'll be right back.
With coronavirus spreading, people at higher risk must take extra precautions. You're at higher risk if you're over 65 or if you have an underlying medical condition. Please visit coronavirus.gov for more information.
Welcome back to Open BxRx. Black Lives Matter protests and peaceful demonstrations against police brutality are still going on across the nation and here in the Bronx. One peaceful protest on June 4th took a violent turn in the South Bronx. Joining us now to discuss and share their testimonies are Nova Lucero and Helen Guzman, who were present at the protest. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us today and for making the time to speak to me about this.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
The first thing I want to start off with is, of course, recounting the peaceful protest that took place before everything turned south. Can you just like guide me through what happened that day in the peaceful protest and the demonstrations that started on Third Avenue?
Um, yeah, well, I mean, I think that first of all, there was a lot of excitement, nervousness, yes, but mostly excitement to go to a protest in the Bronx, um, with, you know, an organization that I believe in, that I trust, that I participated in several of the rallies in the past, of the protests, the marches, including at the Whitney, and also FTP2, which I know all kinds of different people were a part of. So I was excited. I went with my brother, and it was my brother's first protest. And he brought his friend, and we're all Bronx people.
For sure. And I was there too, Nova and Helen. I was able to like witness the power of the protest in the first half of the event. And you know, we walked through NYCHA buildings and like we got all these applauses and people in solidarity with the movement. Nova, can you tell me a little bit more about that before we go to the what happened after?
Yeah, I'm already getting a little teary. I mean, yeah, what I remember is just marching. Like there was a lot of young people there, like a lot more than I expected. It was mostly Bronxites, which was nice, because we don't where there hasn't been a lot of things. At that point, there weren't a lot of marches here in the Bronx. You know, and so a lot of us have had to like travel to Manhattan or to Brooklyn to show support. So it was nice to do something here, and it just was a like real community feeling. Like it just felt like, you know, it was a summer day where like everybody like shared like a lot of love, and you saw that with a lot of support from folks, from the few folks that were outside, or like hanging out of like the windows in NYCHA and any of the developments that we passed by like Patterson houses, and Millbrook, for example. And so like you know, people were blasting music, like people were clapping, some even joined us. So you could definitely like feel like the community spirit.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely agree with that. But now, of course, we got to discuss what happened after. What were your personal experiences and encounter with police brutality that day? What happened and how did it happen, if you can recall?
I remember us walking, you know, protesting, saying like all kinds of things, in terms of like against ICE and the police, and like really, you know, uniting a lot of the issues that different communities are facing, and also one and the same in the Bronx, you know. So anyway, I remember walking towards down Brook, from Willis Avenue, and I remember seeing people run up. So I was there with my brother and his friend, and then, you know, other people that we kind of knew were around us too. So I just remember finding them again and just walking to the other corner, hoping that the protest would like come back and we would be able to continue up, that the protesters would be able to like kind of, I don't know, you know, overcome and like rally, you know, like just like meet up and rally again and like continue going up the block. That's what I was hopeful for. And and of course that didn't happen. I was, you know, my brother and I, we were all, you know, walking up the block ready to leave and head out, because we just didn't really know what to do next, how to continue protesting next, because we just didn't know what was happening down there. Then I see a few police officers have a young man arrested, or individual arrested, and I like am walking past them, so you know, I like call for his name because I'm want to do cop watch, right? And just also make sure that I can let lawyers know that there was a protester that I saw that was being arrested, because they were alone. So as I'm saying that, like there's a policeman who like basically just yells at me to keep walking, and he's yelling at me to keep walking, and I can't hear this person, you know, trying to tell me their name, and I can see that they're like screaming their name. And I'm like, I can't hear them, you know? And so the police is just literally chasing me up, so much so that my brother is like also kind of in between me and the policeman, and they walk us up the block, literally like yelling at us to keep walking, but not letting us keep like walk. And so until they overcome us, and then you can see like another cop, and then like four cops come kind of like pile up, and all basically they start manhandling me and like pulling me around, and then my brother, they're also like, you know, wrangling him, and yeah, and then we're just arrested, and of course the zip ties were incredibly tight. There's like a young person who's up from across the street, like who's filming the my arrest, and I can hear him saying the whole time like, she's a girl, like chill, you know, because they were basically like, anyway, just like grabbing me. And I also was just you know, I wasn't prepared for like their sort of like anger and rage, and just how they were just like so willing and ready to grab at me when we were complying with what they were saying. The police basically like taunt the young people, you know, like say derogatory words to them. Everybody's zip ties, everybody's complaining about their zip ties. And yeah, it was like essentially four young people and me, my brother, and his friend that all were arrested there.
Right. Thank you, Helen, for sharing that. Nova, can you tell me more about, like, I saw a video of people being brutalized and hit with batons. I saw people reacting to being pepper sprayed that day. Based on witness accounts, the sole reason for the arrest that night appeared to be that protesters were out after curfew, right? But it was 7:57 p.m. when the arrest ensued, and many people blamed the protesters for what happened. What is your argument against the use of excessive force and escalation of arrest due to a curfew that was already suspended the next day anyway? So now, you know, what would be the excuse for arresting protesters in a brutal manner now that there's no curfew at all? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was trapped like in the street, like when they first started kettling us, I was right in the middle like of the block. And so me and about like, I mean, I don't know, I counted at least like 60 other people, we were like shoved up against by the police officers, with, you know, and then they started gassing us, and this was way before, this was like at least 15 minutes before 8 o'clock. And there was, I want to like also keep in mind, like note that we were like only a few feet away from a bus station, from a main street. There were a lot of folks again, like that were from the Bronx. So ain't nobody know like who lives down the block or not, or like really close by. A train station was really close. Like we could have, like a lot of folks actually were not intending to break curfew. But I think that regardless, like the curfew was just an excuse for them to be, for the city and for the police to kind of like set an example of like of people who are not in agreement, and calling attention to police brutality to like reprimand us, you know, and really set, like, you know, it was really scary, like to have, like people were watching, you know, this is not like nobody, like it was a side street, but there were a lot of people in houses and like families with little kids, you know, toddlers watching, people across in Nitro were watching outside their windows, and there were people on the street as they like pushed up against us so hard that we were up on top of each other. Like at one point I have like never felt and smelled fear as much as I did when people were like having panic attacks on top of me, and all I could see, I couldn't even see light at one point, and this was still like, it was still bright out. So like I just saw like bodies and limbs on top of me, and then I remember at one point I turned around and I saw like this young Black man in the middle, underneath everybody, just take his last breath and like lose consciousness, and they ended up having to drag him out. And this was after they gassed us, after they pushed us so hard that we were, and like they had already started hitting us. So like then we fumbled to like the ground and we're on top of each other, can't move, right? Clearly can't breathe, and they're still like hitting us with batons. And I saw them snatch like phones out of people's hands that were documenting what was happening. They ripped off masks, threw them through people's wallets and bags. I saw them pull women and men's hair like so far, like 3 feet from themselves, and drag them to the throw them to the ground, smashing their heads on the ground. Um, and there was even like a point where I saw 2 officers were going so hard and hitting us with the batons that the ones in the white shirts, who I guess are the sergeants or their bosses, had to pull them away and was like, that's enough, cool off or something. So like it was like, oh, beat them just enough so that they like don't resist. But like don't beat them enough that like they die on the spot. I don't know. Because what ensued afterwards is just having like people like cuffed so tight and in such an aggressive way that, you know, we know like happens every day to Black folks. But I think it wasn't the brutality that was shocking, because I think that we're all aware of I think it's more of like the excuse of the curfew to really go this like vicious. It was such a large group of people in the middle of the day still. Like it was still bright out. Like so like I still think it's the middle of the day.
And during all of that, all everyone wanted was just to be let go. And there were chants, you know, of people yelling, let us go, and still
and you're hurting us. That's what we were yelling. At one point it was just like, you're hurting us, and crying. There's a lot of crying. Like people weren't even fighting back. Maybe I saw like one person cover, right? Like a lot of people were in such in shock they didn't know how to cover their bodies or their eyes or their hair or anything, you know. They were just in shock.
The next thing I want to discuss is the portrayal of the media of the arrest versus or the protest versus what really happened that day. A lot of the media coverage was just based on like what ensued, but they didn't focus on the fact that this was a peaceful protest from the get-go, and it went wrong towards the end. So like, what are your thoughts collectively on that as well?
I mean, I think that I really do think that whether it was like a quiet march or whether we had decided like, hey, everybody, it's almost we're all gonna, you know, like keep marching, right? Like I think that even if we did that, they would have called us not peaceful for breaking that rule. So I don't even like using that language, because I think that the violence in which the police engage in kind of is already provoking enough. And so any response to that really is it's still not going to ever equate to the violence that they do, you know. But it was unfair, I think, and also really strategic for the city and the mayor and the police department, especially Shea, to say like that, oh, we were planning on looting, when like you should have, like, ain't nobody. We were literally just walking the street.
Helen, did you want to follow up with thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what Nova was sharing. I think that definitely it was very racist and like from like like racist, and also just absurd, like a lot of what they were saying to the mayor was saying, and the police department and other news outlets, that you know that these folks, that protesters were out there to cause mayhem. Like there was just, I feel like there was a lot of folks in the Bronx in power that literally played a role like of Pontius Pilate, or you know, or like the, you know, like when I think that what they really are upset about is that we had more political analysis, you know, about the situation, and we were just Bronxites and other people from the city that that had emotions and like wanted to say the police and you know, ICE, and And they basically wanted to squash that, like they've historically done that in the Bronx.
Thank you both. Before we go, can you just give us a little bit of tips on like how protesters can protect each other and practice de-arresting if they're in a situation like this, if you're able to do that?
At this point, I'm just like, do I need to like wear a helmet, like a biking helmet? You know, like, am I gonna need to go in there with like wrist guards and like knee pads and shit? Like, because I was there with literally just my PPE, and cops, of course, weren't doing that. You know, not even the bare minimum to keep people actually safe. I guess go protected because they're out swinging with, you know, like swinging at people with batons. So, what can I say based on this experience?
Yeah, I definitely have seen a lot of people do it. I mean, they're in riot gear, right? Like y'all, they're in riot gear. They were on roofs. They were in helicopters. They were on bikes. They were in, you know, cars that were official cars and non, you know, like regular plain like cars. I would say some things to keep in mind. They might change their mind about how violent to be, and to like come being prepared to do that, if you're, especially if you're like an ally for Black folks, and that like to, because that's what I went, and you know, I knew that my mindset was like, I'm gonna be there to be like an anti-racist, right? And so like I go in there with like my mental preparation that like things might get really, really violent, right? I would say some practical things have been shared with me is like, don't bring credit cards, bring cash, bring your ID, like make sure your ID is valid. Make sure you have like a buddy with you, like a friend. Sometimes it's also good to have the legal, like a legal service organization number there, especially if you're not, if you don't know the group well that you're marching with or protesting with, because you would want to let somebody know that you were detained, so that they can follow up, right? Especially if you're alone. Also, the zip ties may seem like they don't hurt, but yo, they hurt. They can hurt a lot. Like my hands turned blue. So just be like mentally ready. I also think that like sharing whatever is up with you, like if you're pregnant, say, yo, I'm pregnant. If you have a disability, whether it's visible or not, say that. um you know, if there's any other things like going on with you, like those are the things that you need to like communicate to be able to ensure that your rights, you know, as many of your rights are taken seriously as possible.
Thank you both again for joining us today, and thank you for your time and for sharing your testimonies on what happened that day.
Thank you for having us.
Folks, let's check out my story on what took place that day. Open BxRx. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open BxRx. According to the New York City Department of Transportation, the city has seen a spike in cycling since the beginning of the confirmed coronavirus outbreak. And through the pandemic, Transportation Alternatives has helped essential workers travel through their bike share program. Joining us now to discuss the program and more is Joseph Cutrufo, Communications Director of Transportation Alternatives. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. The first thing right off the bat, can you just tell us more about Transportation Alternatives and your mission there?
Yeah, Transportation Alternatives is a nonprofit organization that works in the 5 boroughs. We've been around for 47 years, and our mission is to reclaim the streets from the automobile and to advocate for biking, walking, and public transit as the best transportation alternatives.
Right. And now to bring it back up to current events, I've seen a lot of cyclists at the Black Lives Matter protests. Transportation Alternatives shared support of the movements on Twitter, and you also called for the removal of the NYPD from traffic enforcement. Can you tell us more about this?
We need to reallocate some resources from the NYPD because traffic safety is not just about police enforcement. And really, that's not the wisest use of funding to keep our streets safe. It's also not the most equitable use of funding to keep our streets safe. Transportation Alternatives, we believe that infrastructure like automated enforcement, red light cameras, speed safety cameras that we have in school zones, and smart street design that slows traffic and prevents speeding. That's the way to keep people safe on our streets. You can't enforce your way to Vision Zero. And as we've seen from the NYPD, they're not really that effective in keeping us safe from reckless drivers. A very small percentage of hit and run drivers ever face consequences, for example. And of course, throughout New York City, people of color face much different consequences, especially when there are traffic stops. You see much different consequences for people of color throughout New York City.
And on cyclist deaths in New York City, how does TA fight for safer streets, and what must change to help this, to stop this, really?
So, 2019 was a really difficult year for cyclists. We saw the number of fatalities for people on bikes rise from 10 in 2018 to 29 in 2019. It's really disheartening to see, even as the number of people on bikes grows, we've seen the number of fatalities rising. So we haven't seen that safety in numbers effect that we should be seeing. When City Bike came into the city, we saw so many more people on bikes, and drivers became more used to driving around people on bikes. And it's been a net improvement over the last decade or so in terms of safety for cyclists. But last year was a bit of an outlier in that regard. We don't want to see a repeat of 2019. And the way to get there is through safe infrastructure. The de Blasio administration brought Vision Zero to New York City, and the de Blasio administration has had a fair to good track record in expanding the number of miles of protected bike lanes. But there are still a lot of gaps in that network, and we need to fill in those gaps and expand the network into neighborhoods where it is not reaching currently. And those are many communities of color. That's most of the Bronx. It's most of Staten Island. It's most of Eastern Queens and South Brooklyn. So, we need to do better. We can't just have protected bike lanes in Manhattan and Brownstone, Brooklyn. The Bronx especially is an area where we need to see improvement on that regard.
Here in the Bronx in particular, we've seen a surge of essential workers traveling back and forth on their bikes in regards to healthcare workers and also delivery workers. Please tell us more about your bike match program and how it's helped essential workers through COVID-19.
So a few months ago, one of our staff members, Jay Oberman, who's our art director, he had an extra bike in the hallway of his building that he wasn't using anymore. And, once our office went to work from home, and he didn't really need that bike anymore. He wasn't using it to commute anyway. He just put a note out on Facebook and said, "Hey, I have this extra bike. There must be someone out there who's either delivering food or doing mutual aid who could use it more than I could." And quickly, one of his friends snatched up the bike, and he told us about that. And we thought, hey, we might want to expand this to more people. How do we do that? So the bike match was born. The program has matched about 200 individuals with bikes. We've received about 1,000 responses. So, it's a 20% success rate, but that's actually pretty good when you consider that, not every bike is appropriate for every person. If you're 6 feet tall, you can't ride a bike that's meant for someone who's 5 feet tall, and vice versa. And also, if you're trying to avoid the subway, if you live in the Bronx, you're probably not going to go and get a bike from somebody who lives in Brooklyn.
Right.
So, geography and height are two considerations, and also what you're going to be using the bike for. So, fortunately, we had a lot of people step up who had extra bikes to donate, and we actually got some corporate support. So Bike Rent NYC, which is one of the major bike rental companies in New York, they donated several dozen bikes, and the bike manufacturer Specialized, which operates worldwide, they donated bikes, several hundred bikes to bike match programs around the United States. And when I say bike match programs, that's because our idea was so good that cities around the country copied it, and they use the same sort of mechanisms that we use to match people and essential workers, to match essential workers with bikes. And we've seen a lot of success, and it's been one of those bright spots in an otherwise really difficult time.
Right. I love it. And thank you to TA for being the pioneers of that movement. Just for folks out there who are seeking to participate in the bike share program, how can people get in touch or sign up, to receive a bike or give a bike?
bikematch.nyc, and that'll take you to our homepage for our bike match program, and it'll show you both how you can offer up a bike if you have an extra one, or how you can request a bike.
Thank you, Joseph. Now, going back to just the importance of protected bike lanes and busways here in New York City, how can people advocate for change in their streets?
There's a lot of different ways to get involved, both with our organization and on your own. So, if you have unsafe streets in your neighborhood, one of your best bets is to reach out to your council member. Some council members are people we work closely with. There are many current council members who see the importance of safe streets, and they've worked closely with us throughout the years on, from joining us at rallies, calling for safer streets, to signing on to legislation for safer streets. So, much of the city council is very much on board with the work that we do, and the movement toward Vision Zero. If you see that you're not getting results through your council member's office, you can always reach out to Transportation Alternatives. We have organizers in every borough. We have volunteer activists in every borough. And one of the best ways to get involved, come to one of our activist committee meetings. Maybe not physically, but through Zoom. We're still meeting, and we're still talking about the important issues in each borough. We've got active campaigns in every borough, and many of our campaigns are focused on the most dangerous streets. Boston Road in the Bronx, for example, has been one we've been focused on. In previous years, we spent a lot of time on Grand Concourse. So, there's no shortage of improvements that we can make on our streets, but our volunteer activists and our staff, they have ears on the ground, and they know how to make change.
My dad is a cyclist at age 67, so I thank TA for the advocacy for safer streets. I really worry about him, especially through COVID-19, going out into the streets. He usually rides really far into upstate and all of that. But I wanted to also ask you about the challenges that Transportation Alternatives faces and other advocacy groups face when it comes to advocating for these safe streets measures. Why is it taking so long to implement some of these things?
Some people in our city government see changes to the streets as controversial, especially when those changes come at the cost of parking spaces. And sometimes when those changes come at the cost of, removing a travel lane for cars and trucks. We tend to think that, an equitable transportation network is one where you can get around by not only car, but also by bus or by bike as well. And our streets are not really reflecting that in their current state. We've seen a lot of change in the last couple of decades, but we need to see it more quickly. And we need our elected leaders to be bolder when it comes to redesigning streets. We know what works, and that's reallocating space away from cars and toward pedestrians, people on bikes, and transit users, especially in a city where less than half of households drive. And the Bronx is no different from any other borough. The physical infrastructure changes that we've seen in Brownstone, Brooklyn, and in Lower Manhattan, they work there, and they should work in the Bronx as well. They haven't been as expedient, and we've seen some local council members pushing back against those things. It's something we're working on all the time. There are neighborhoods where more people drive, and you see more pushback in, community board meetings about these issues. But we need to take the politics out of the process. For too long, we have allowed community boards to stand in the way. It's not to say that community boards shouldn't have a voice. Of course they should. But we have a sophisticated DOT who knows how to slow down speeders, who knows how to, have more, who knows how to, attract more cyclists to a given street and how to make it safe to do so. Community boards don't necessarily have that expertise. And, it would be the future that we envision is one where community boards have a voice but don't have a veto. And right now we're seeing a situation in which community boards are often stopping safety from happening.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for your time and for coming on to represent Transportation Alternatives today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Folks, you can visit transalt.org and follow at Transportation Alternatives on Instagram to learn more about their advocacy for a cycle-friendly NYC. That's all for our show today. Thank you for tuning in to Open BxRx. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, wishing you and your family safety and wellness now and always. Until next time.